Hi, my name is Erin Riley, and I'm an assistant professor of psychology in the PhD program in clinical psychology at Hofstra University. I was wanting to make this video. I saw that Dr. Aaron Blashill did a great video on YouTube, on Twitter, talking a little bit about his lab and the program that he works in for prospective applicants. So I wanted to just do a brief overview of some typically asked questions that I'm getting around this time of year for people that are wanting to pursue a PhD in clinical psych potentially through Hofstra. So I figure I'll start with a couple of things about the Hofstra's program specifically, and then move into my lab and what you can kind of expect in applying to my lab and what I'm really looking for in my applicants. So the first thing is that Hofstra's program, like I mentioned, is a PhD in clinical psych. The program is APA accredited. We just got our accreditation renewed, so we should be accredited for I think, at least 10 years. It's a scientist practitioner model, and so students get training not only in clinical work and receive a lot of different experiences there, as well as in research. One unique thing that the program has that I think is a huge selling point is that we have our in-house clinic that a lot of PhD programs have. However, many of the faculty members have their own specialty clinics, and so students can see patients at specialty clinics and receive specialty training in different evidence-based therapies, like acceptance and commitment therapy, dialectical behavior therapy. And one thing worth noting that I'll come back to is we'll be opening an eating disorder specific clinic that my students will get some clinical experience through, starting likely in their second years that it's on campus. Another note is that many of the requirements for the programs are similar to what you'd see with other PhD programs, but particularly related to the GRE, we're no longer requiring the GRE for applicants. So if you have your scores, you can use them, but they won't be considered within the admissions process as they were in the past. In terms of what we're looking for in applicants, and specifically what I'm looking for, because my past training was in research, I'm looking for folks that want to have research as a part of their future careers, whether that be the main focus of their career or whether they're looking for more of a dual focus on both clinical and research within, for instance, like an academic medical center. That, to me, I'm flexible, but I want someone that is going to enjoy and want to incorporate that into their future work. Because one piece of this is that you'll be doing a lot of research when you're working with me at Hofstra, and so we want to make sure that you've enjoyed that and want to receive that training. So second to that, one thing I'm definitely looking for in my applicants is that they've had research experiences before, either as an undergraduate or in the time following undergraduate in between during like a post-bac or something like that. Something that I think I get a lot of questions about is whether a specific experience in eating disorders is necessary, because I study eating disorders and anxiety disorders. I would definitely say not. I'm more concerned that folks have some exposure to parts of the research process, whether that be asking questions and doing literature searches, et cetera, versus a lot of specific content area in eating disorders. So of the 3 students that I have that are first years, only one of them had prior experience really working with some folks with eating disorders. And so all I'm looking for is that you have a lot of interest in learning more about eating disorders and will like to spend time doing that, as well as, again, exposure to different parts of the research process, with the caveat in mind that there's only certain types of research activities that folks can gain experience to, and I'm mindful of that. So the other thing that I'm excited about in applicants is seeing in the personal statement and through any prior research experiences that the applicant has some specific questions that they're really passionate about answering. These often, and this is not a bad thing by any means, often these are born out of prior research experiences. So whether those are related to past mentors' questions or not is less relevant, but I want to see really that you have begun to think about, if you were to begin your research when you arrive at Hofstra, what would that look like? What types of questions get you really excited and get you ready to do kind of the hard work that is required of students within a PhD program in doing research? The last thing that I'm really looking for is a fit between what the student is looking for in a lab environment and what we provide. So I have very collaborative lab environment. And for me, I work very collaboratively. I have a lot of collaborators outside of Hofstra, and I love doing team science. And so folks that want to be part of a collaborative lab environment, that get excited about research, like I mentioned, like and really want to be reading and discussing and doing all the things that we do in that team science environment. That's really what I'm looking for in an applicant, someone that's excited about that potential. On my website, which I can link in the tweet, I also have outlined sort of the lab guiding values, the principles that are important to me as a researcher and in cultivating a lab environment. And so I think really making sure that the applicant looks over those beforehand and has kind of found that that's what they're looking for, because we want to make sure that I can give you what you need as a trainee. In terms of the specifics of the READ Lab, I think first of all, the READ Lab stands for Research on Eating and Anxiety Disorders. We broadly do research characterizing shared features of eating disorders and anxiety disorders, and use this work or use this understanding to ultimately develop improved treatments for eating disorders. So I'm really excited to take on applicants that are excited about anything within the larger umbrella of eating and anxiety disorders. Something that I think is important to ask about when you're going through this process is how a mentor sort of approaches students' research versus their own research, and whether the students work on their own things or they work on the mentor's things. My personal approach is that I, at any given time, have a couple of different projects that I'm pushing forth myself. And my policy is if there's enough work to go around, the more the merrier. I love being collaborative. And so students are encouraged, and I connect them with projects or data sets that I have around. I also encourage students to develop their own interests, so long as I'm kind of suitable to mentor them and have the knowledge base required to mentor them. There's been instances in which students I've worked with have had interests a little bit outside of my scope. In those cases, I do my best to attempt to connect you with other researchers that can provide supplemental mentorship, because we want to make sure, again, that you're not only getting training in general research skills throughout time in graduate school, but also getting connected with experts in content areas, so you can leave kind of really being an expert in that area that you've chosen. Right now we have a number of graduate students in the lab. We have 3 graduate students that are working specifically with me, and then at least 8 others who participate in lab activities as a secondary lab. So Hofstra is a little bit unique in the sense that students can get involved with multiple labs, and the way that we manage that in my lab is we have a tier system. So folks participate in different levels of commitment to the lab in terms of meetings that they come to, and how often they meet with me for professional development. And so I have 3 students again that are working with me full time, and those students are exploring, connecting with other faculty at Hofstra as well. We have 1 undergraduate and then 1 post-bac volunteer for now, and hoping to grow the lab more soon. Like I mentioned before, we have a number of different projects going on. Currently, we have a couple of secondary data analysis projects that the lab is working on, specifically focused on different aspects of anxiety and eating. For interested folks, feel free to email me. I have like a handout developed for outlining some of the current projects, but to give some examples, we're working on a proposal with some other researchers on developing a measure of safety behaviors in eating disorders. We're working on some proposals for neuroimaging work looking at intolerance and uncertainty in eating disorders, and we're starting to collect data looking at high-risk undergraduates for eating disorders and looking at intolerance of uncertainty, rumination or other repetitive thought, and eating disorder symptoms. So those are just a couple of sample studies that we are in the midst of developing. We're also, like I mentioned, working on some papers and some secondary analysis. I'm more than happy to give more details on those for folks that are interested in the types of projects that we have rolling. Additionally, the current students that are working with me, their contact information is up on my website. So feel free to give them a shout too if you want to ask about what it's like working with me or current projects that they might be working on. In terms of methodologies that we use, like I mentioned or sort of alluded to, is that we have a couple of projects that will use EMA, ecological momentary assessment moving forward. We really like statistics in the lab, and so a couple of projects looking at use of advanced statistical analyses. Many of the lab folks are learning R, we're all kind of learning it together. And then some other projects using behavioral tasks in particular. We're collaborating with some folks on neuroimaging work. I don't do that work specifically, but there's mentors at Hofstra that are available for folks that want to develop that expertise. Yeah, I think those are our primary methodologies, and then certainly some self-report measurements. Like I alluded to before, we will be, I'm in the midst of beginning to set up the infrastructure for a clinic where students will be able to see cases and hopefully develop some short-term or smaller scale clinical studies. Like specifically the design will be, or the clinic will be well suited to like single case designs and treatment development. Relatedly, we're actually working on a project with Dr. Phyllis Orr's labs, developing a new treatment and testing a new treatment for younger kiddos who have picky eating. So a lot of collaboration going on at Hofstra that's really exciting. Let's see, there was something else I wanted to say. Oh, in terms of expectations, I expect that students attend weekly lab meetings. They meet with me on a regular basis, whether that be weekly or bi-weekly, and that they apply for grants. One other thing that's good to know about Hofstra's program is it's not fully funded. So students do pay tuition, partial tuition and fees. And so something that's really important to me is that I, excuse me, work with students to apply for grants like NSF grants and F31 grants. And so the recommendations is that students are willing and excited about putting in those grants to fund their own research, so then we can help supplement funds. I think there's more to be said, but I'll cut it off for now. If you have any more questions, I anticipate taking a student this cycle, and I'm more than happy to chat with potential applicants if there's other questions that are not answered on the frequently asked questions page of my website. All right, thank you, and looking forward to seeing applications this year.